Today we're playing as Gabriel Nassif, arguably one of the best control players of all time. He has not only one, but 2 Pro Tour wins and so many top 8s to go alongside it. Well, despite this, I want to make some content. I decided to challenge Gabriel Nassif to a money match, and he accepted. Okay, so Gab, we're going to be playing a modern blue-white control mirror. Same 60 cards, so this matchup is all about skill. Have you tried out this deck list yet?
No, I haven't, but I've been known to play a control mirror or two in my days.
Do you realize that the winner of this match will be crowned the best blue control player on our podcast, right?
Sure, Harry.
Okay, we can chat all we want, Gab. Let's put our money where our mouth is and let's go play.
Alright, let's go. I'm ready.
As we both shuffle up and keep our opening 7s, I just want to highlight that we chose a list specifically with no Teferi, Time Raveler, or Force of Negation, and there's no sideboards. We're just focusing on a pure 60 card mirror, and it's going to be a lot of fun with some nice 1-ofs. Anyways, we start the game on the draw. Both of us just hit our land drops and keep passing. With the Colonnade and Hall of Storm Giants, I'm feeling like I'm in a good spot, as these are 2 very good utility lands for the mid to late game. As we're on the draw, Gab gets to resolve his Archmage's Charm first, but we have 2 Archmage's Charms to follow up to keep drawing cards. It's very unlikely for either of us to tap out in the early game, as we do have things like Shark Typhoon, Snapcaster Consider, as well as just more charms. We're just looking to hit our land drops and dig for more counterspells, and look to use counterspells and big bombs on the later turns. Now, as we charmed and we are on the draw, we do have to go to discard here with 8 cards in hand. But Gab cycles Shark Typhoon for 2, and I decide to Solitude pitching Prismatic Ending, as I was going to discard the Prismatic Ending, and we can get more cards back into hand with this other charm or the Cryptic Command. To beat a Hall of Famer at a game of Magic the Gathering, you need a miracle, and I do get that when he has to go to his discard because he misses his land drop. Now, I cast an Archmage's Charm, which I think is a mistake in hindsight, as it allows Gab to cast a counterspell and not need to discard a card. It's not the end of the world, as we get to hit our land drop, and Gab ultimately did burn a counterspell out of his hand. He considers in his main phase, hits his land drop, and says go. I have a choice between Snap and Solitude on the end step. I go with Snap as I want to keep filling up my hand with cards, but Gab has a second counterspell. I decide to hold back with Colonnade, as we do have Cryptic counterspell up, so we just both land go for a bit. We top deck an Archmage's Charm, which is perfect to cast on the end step, so let's keep draw going. Gab cycles a 4/4 Shark on my end step, and I decide to steal it with Archmage's Charm. This is because I have counterspell up, as well as if Gab does resolve a Planeswalker next turn, I can actually attack it with both the Shark and a creature land, making it hard for him to protect his Planeswalkers, so we now control his Shark and let him take his turn. Gab uses Prismatic Ending on the Shark and passes back the go. Now, you may not have noticed, but Gab didn't make a land drop this turn. That means that he has 6 spells in hand, and this is going to be a tough game as I only have 3. I say this while I top deck another Flooded Strand, so we have to land go again, still with Cryptic counterspell up. Snapcaster Mage is put on the stack, so I counterspell it. With our hand running dry, and Gab having 5 spells in hand because he's been missing land drops, I decide to put the Solitude on the stack in desperation. It resolves and we draw a Memory Deluge. I attack with the Solitude, and Gab has a Solitude of his own, so I Memory Deluge in response. It finds us a Click and a Consider, and I decide not to use my Cryptic Command as it'd be too weak to counterspell here. Gab untaps and plays a Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Now, with 2 blue open, I think it's quite obvious that he has a counterspell, so I'd rather cast Vendilion Click and Consider than only 1 spell to be eaten by the counter, as I want to be mana efficient. Gab has the counter, draws a card with Teferi, we consider and find a Teferi of our own. I draw another Consider and cast that in my main phase. This finds a Snapcaster Mage. Now I can play my Teferi, plus enough Snapcaster counterspell, I could play my Teferi in tuck, or I can just pass. I decide to just pass and play patient, as the Snapcaster Mage can dig me for more things, and because Gab taps low on my end step, I can now bounce draw the Teferi Hero, and luckily we find another counterspell of our own. The Teferi's put back on the stack, we have to use our counterspell, and Gab has the 4th counterspell out of his deck. It makes sense that he has this because he was mana screwed. He pluses, plays his land and passes. This is now representing Archmage's Charm, which is a problem. We draw a Snapcaster Mage, so I take this opportunity to attack Teferi for 4 with my Colonnade, as well as have Snap Consider up. Gab continues to play patient by plussing the Teferi, playing a tapped Colonnade, and not attacking. We can now Snap Consider, finding us another Consider. Drawing a Mystic Gate, I'm very scared of another Snapcaster Mage or Archmage's Charm from Gab. Now something important is that this Celestial Colonnade was just put into play, so if I attack and Gab animates it, then it now cannot be tapped for mana. This will let me cast Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and also be able to fight back on the counterspell. But the Teferi instantly resolves, so this makes me want to consider to have more information on what's going to be in my hand before I decide to tuck or draw. Finding a Shark Typhoon, I decide that plussing is a great line, because we can cycle the Shark Typhoon for 1 or 2 to either trade with the Solitude or chump the Colonnade. He cycles a Shark for 1, untaps, pluses the Teferi, and only attacks with the Solitude and the Shark. This leads for me to want to Shark Typhoon for X's 2 so that I can try and trade with the Solitude with Spell Snare backup. Unfortunately, Gab has a Solitude that exiles my blocker and Teferi goes to 1 loyalty. We find another Shark Typhoon, a Prismatic Ending, and a land. This leads me to be in a weird spot. I go for the cycle Shark Typhoon for 1, as don't forget, we have Memory Deluge in our graveyard which we can flash back, and we have Spell Snare and Snapcaster Mage to try and fight through their counter and interaction to make sure we can try and protect this Teferi, but it's not looking good for us. I'm leaning more on this Memory Deluge. Gab ups the pressure by playing a Vendilion Click, getting rid of one of my Snapcaster Mages. It finds us a Jace. We get our 2 lands untapped, and at the beginning of combat I try to flash in my Snapcaster Mage, but they have the charm. I can trade nicely with the click, but my Teferi sadly dies, and we can flashback Memory Deluge to find 2 counterspells. Things get interesting though when I top deck Shark Typhoon. I'm gonna try and hardcast it as Gab can only have so many counters in his deck, and it instantly resolves. This lets me Prismatic Ending the Shark token and pass the turn. Now any spell that we counter makes us a token. Gab tries to tuck the Shark Typhoon, and because I want board presence, I decide to draw 2 cards now to get my 3/3 and 2 extra cards, attempting to build a board either to attack the Teferi or to protect this Jace. Both Solitudes get in for 6 lifelink, and I untap and attack the Teferi. Gab uses the Colony to eat the 3/3, and we slam the Jace. They didn't have a counterspell for the Shark Typhoon, and they don't have the counterspell for the Jace. Let's brainstorm and use this fetch land to shuffle away useless cards. We're starting to pull back into the game. With 3 attackers, this Jace is destined to die, but at least there's no Planeswalkers on either side of the board. Before combat, a Jace is put on the stack, so is my counterspell, and the Colonnade is animated and my Jace is killed. As we know the top 2 cards are lands, we gotta fetch them away on Gab's end step, and we're looking to slam this Shark Typhoon. Things are looking pretty good for us here. We have double Prismatic Ending. While there's nothing we can Prismatic Ending on the board, don't forget this is an X spell, so we can pay X is 10 if we would like, and it doesn't matter the colors, because that would make an 11/11. X is 10, plus 1 white, 11 CMC, so we can now work around this expensive Prismatic Ending to just make big creatures to attack Gab. Gab considers and then attacks me for 6 lifelink. I'm not gonna block. After attack, Gab casts Memory Deluge, picks 2 cards, and then says go, clearly setting up to flash it back on my end step. Drawing Misty Rainforest is kind of a brick, so I'm going to use the Prismatic Ending trick with X is 7, so I both Counterspell and Spell Snare backup here on his turn. I'm holding this Misty Rainforest as we do have another Jace in the deck, and the extra land drop isn't doing us any good. I'd rather tuck it away in a Brainstorm. Gab flashes back Memory Deluge, and I decide not to counter back. This might be wrong, but I'm just saving it for his win conditions, as don't forget he's essentially run out of counterspells. He untaps and endings our big 8/8 though, leading for me to chump block. Post-combat, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is put on the stack. We gotta counterspell that, but Gab lets the trigger resolve and counter bounces the Shark token. I was really hoping he would use a Snapcaster Mage there. Teferi tucks the Shark Typhoon, and we whiff our draw step, forcing us to attack the Teferi. As Colonnade has Vigilance, we can both attack and block. We're hanging on a very thin string, and this Snapcaster Mage on the end step essentially locks up the game. GG's, on to game 2. As a reminder, this challenge we have no sideboards as both decks are tuned to play against each other. It's a same 60 card mirror. I'm on the play and keep a nice opening 7. Wow, a blue-white control mirror where no one casts something until turn 3. This is me casting an Archmage's Charm to draw 2 cards with a Snapcaster Mage and a Shark Typhoon. We're flooded on Snapcaster Mages, so all we want to do is hit our land drops and keep drawing cards. So playing this Mystic Gate here, I'm looking to cycle the Shark Typhoon for 2 and get on the aggressive plan. There is a world where we start flashing in 2/1 Snapcaster Mages just to attack to keep the pressure on, as we know that there's no Supreme Verdict, but because there's Solitude in both of our decks, I need to be afraid of that. With Gab playing a tap land, I don't need to be afraid of solituding my Solitude, so I put my own Solitude on the table, hit in for 5, and play Hall of Storm Giants so that I can potentially attack with that next turn. Gab uses Charm to steal my Shark to present both a trade for Solitude and a potential chump, but he just land goes, so I go for Snapcaster Mage. Spell Snare blows me out, Just untap, Prismatic Ending the Shark token, and get in. Gab taps low on my end step, so I decide to snap Charm Draw 2 now so that I can have maximum pressure on the board. Don't forget there's no sweepers, and if Gab decides to tap low for a Planeswalker, I have so much pressure on the board I can attack it back. Jace the Mind Sculptor comes down, a Brainstorm, land, Vendilion Click, takes my Snapcaster Mage, and evokes Solitude. This might have been the worst turn for us, and potentially our Snap Draw 2 might have been too greedy. With our fetch sound, we can get a Breeding Pool for 4 colors to Prismatic Ending the Jace, and I attack. Gab trades with the Click. This snap attack also might have been greedy because we can either bounce the snap with Otawara or with Cryptic Command. So again, another thing to think about. On Gab's end step, I bounce draw the Hall of Storm Giants, and it works because he taps low with the Cryptic Command. Now we would get blown out with Solitude, but with a counterspell off the top, we can now attack with Protection. He goes to 1 and casts a Memory Deluge. I'm not going to counter it, only removal spells and threats. Colonnade go, and we whiff our draw step. Things are not looking amazing for us as Gab has 4 cards in hand and a Deluge to flashback, so we just gotta hope that we can sneak through a threat. Gab has a snap. I'm gonna go for counterspell as it chumps our haul, but he has counterspell backup, and now the game is really starting to pull away, especially with the Misty Rainforest off the top. Deluge is flashed back, Gab has 7 cards in hand, we find a Shark Typhoon, and the way I'm trying to steal this game is that we can use Shark Typhoon, bounce the blocker, and get in for 1. I cycle the Shark for 5 so that we can attack through Colonnade. We draw a Charm and a Deluge, so I start with Deluge, Gab has a counterspell, another Shark Typhoon. So now the line is I'm going to try and steal a Shark to win the game, but just Gab has it all. With so much card draw, we can use the Charm here, but there's a Snapcaster Mage put on the stack to put the nail in the coffin. Oh, Gab, you get my $100. How does it feel?
I just kind of feel that. How many McDonald's is $100?
A lot for a broke student.
Poor Harry's just gonna starve.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know, I learned from you, especially co-hosting a podcast midweek metagame alongside Patrick Robertson. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on to the channel.
Yeah, that was really fun match. You know, kind of felt like pure control mirror matches. No, you know, Teferi Time Raveler BS or stuff like that. I think maybe our list should have had maybe like a Verdict, maybe a March, few cards, maybe the 5th color for ending on Teferi, so that you didn't just know, oh, I can just flood the board with as many creatures as possible and nothing bad can happen. You know, that was kind of the game plan in game 1. And but yeah, it was fun.
Awesome. Well, for those watching, if you enjoyed this, then please like and subscribe, and maybe we'll play against some more pros in the future.